What's up everybody, Jesse here. Now, I'm going to be super honest with you guys. I'm going to shoot it straight. I was not a very good student for most of my undergraduate degree. It probably wasn't until I got to my last year in college. I took 5 years to do my undergraduate degree. It probably wasn't until I got to that 5th year that I realized that the strategies that I was using then were not going to work for after college by the time I get to Anesthesiologist Assistant School. Even by the time I was going to take my MCAT. I had one class that sort of changed my whole perspective on how I should be studying, what personally works best for me, and how to go about getting really good at nailing down these study strategies to do well on tests like the MCAT, on the Anesthesiologist Assistant Board Exam. Future Jesse really depended on me to figure out how exactly I should be studying and how to understand and learn material in the most efficient way possible. So today I'm going to share with you guys how I learned how to study all the way throughout my undergraduate degree. What worked for me, what didn't work for me, what I would change so that you guys can kind of have a starting point on how you guys should be studying for big exams, big classes, so that you too can get into Anesthesiologist Assistant School. It's snowing pretty heavily outside right now, so I'm boarded up inside. On my last video, I got a couple comments of people asking to kind of talk about how I personally studied for the MCAT, how I would study for the board exam for becoming an anesthesiologist assistant. So yeah, this video is going to be a lot about my study strategies, different tips and tricks for you guys, mainly focusing on the MCAT and how I was able to perform on the MCAT, but also just some other things about general study tips, study habits that you guys can develop as well. I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, kind of starting from the beginning. Like I said, all the way throughout undergraduate, I do not think I had any study strategies whatsoever that were gonna get me all the way through college. I was sort of the student that would look at PowerPoints the night before, that would maybe just jot down notes randomly, sporadically, not really having any plan or any idea of what I was gonna use those for. And even some basic easy classes that weren't science classes, I would just kind of cruise through them. I wouldn't try to refine my study strategies in those classes. I would just kind of let the wind guide me wherever it wanted me to go. And I didn't have good study strategies. Now that worked for a very long time until I got to one specific class in my 5th year. It was immunology.
What in the actual...
And holy cow, immunology was really hard. It was my first graduate level class. Every class that I had taken up to this point was undergraduate. So I got there surrounded by grad students. I'm the young undergrad guy, and I was like, I didn't really think twice about having to refine my study strategies in order to do well in the class. So I just kind of kept just cruising along in the class, not really learning anything until I got to the first exam, and then boom, I bombed that first exam. I did not do well at all. And that was definitely a wake-up call. Like, I can't just skim through this class. I have to really lock in and find a way to build these habits that are going to help me succeed in this class, not just now, but in the future. And at that time, I was pre-med, and I was thinking about how am I going to study for, medical school exams, and same thing for anesthesiologist assistant school. How am I going to study for these really hard, comprehensive exams that are going to be thrown at me when I'm a student? So very quickly, I realized something needed to change. Probably the biggest thing that I learned from that class, separate from all the stuff I'm going to talk about as far as the MCAT goes, is if you're in your undergraduate degree, or even if you're not in your undergraduate degree and you're taking classes in high school, or even if you're in anesthesiologist assistant school, one thing that I really took away from that experience is use the resources that you have around you. You have classmates, you have teachers that want to help you, that want you to succeed. I don't know if it's exactly that way for different undergraduate universities, but at least where I went to do my undergrad at the University of Northern Colorado, my professors really wanted me to succeed, really wanted to help me out. So in other classes before immunology, I would be studying and I would get to the exam and it's kind of like a toss-up on what's going to be on the exam. But when I would go in and talk to my professors, especially after I took this immunology class, I realized that I would go in, they would see that I earnestly did want to learn the content and the material and do well in the class. And they would be like, hey, this is something that's super important for exam 1 or exam 2, or you'll definitely see this on the final exam. Stuff that I wouldn't have gotten in class or watching lecture that I got by going in and talking to these professors. So that was really big for me. The professors, at least where I did my undergrad, really wanted to help me and really wanted to see me succeed. And I think that for any student, it's worth a try to use your resources and use everything to your advantage, not just to like get brownie points, but to earnestly try to learn, and people will help you learn and they want to understand how you learn. That's how my professors treated me, especially when I started to make an intention to go in there after class. The other thing that really helped me in that time was using the other students that were in the class. Up until that point, for my various classes, my studying would consist of me boarded away in my room, studying, going through my notes, you know, on the night before an exam. And then I got to the immunology class, and it was a hard class. All the other students too were like, this is hard. We need to find strategies that are gonna work for us to get through this class. So we all made study groups. We would all meet outside of class and go over the content. And I know that kind of seems like something that you should be doing normally, but I wasn't doing that for a long time. And I know that there's other students that were probably like me that would sort of try to lone wolf everything. And the second that I started working with those study groups, the second that I started going into seeing my professor, I just saw my grades in that class increase. Not just in that class, but in other classes that I use those strategies in as well, such as organic chemistry, which is another hard class, as you guys probably know. That helped me so much on just seeing my grades get better, seeing my study habits get developed. I would say that was probably one of the biggest things I learned during my undergraduate degree about how to study and be successful in school. So I get done with immunology, I finish the class, and the next thing on the docket for me is the MCAT. Now, as you guys know, the MCAT, or medical college admissions test, is one of the tests that most anesthesiologist assistant programs require you to take in order for admission to the program. I hear oftentimes varying different opinions on if the MCAT, it looks better on your application. I'm not going to speak to that because I don't know what admissions committee members are thinking, but I personally think that taking the MCAT shows you want to take initiative to take a harder exam, take an exam that most people will probably shy away from when it comes to admissions. And getting a good score on that, I think, speaks more to how you personally study, how you take exams, more than anything else, I would say. However, I will say that a good GRE score is better than a bad MCAT score. So if you go for the MCAT, make sure you just really nail that MCAT, because it is a hard exam. I say this every video, but that exam took so much out of me. I really felt defeated in the middle of studying for the MCAT. But throughout that whole process, throughout the 4 months that I studied for the MCAT, I learned so much about how I personally learn information. You know, I'm gonna share that with you guys right now. So the first thing that I did when it comes to the MCAT is know the day that you're taking the test. For me, it was April 26th. Circled that in my calendar, and what I did is I worked backwards from that point to build my study schedule, to build when I would be taking practice exams. So for me personally, I started on basically January 1st of 2024 and took the MCAT on April 26, 2024. So yeah, but a bit less than 4 months is what I spent studying for the MCAT. That's probably on the lower end. Some people might say 4 to 6 months is going to be the sweet spot, but I think it just kind of depends on your situation. A lot of people are working like other jobs. A lot of people are full-time students. It's hard to kind of squeeze in this insane amount of studying that you have to do for the MCAT to be able to do that for such a long amount of time. Maybe if you have more time during the day, or you're not doing as many things like studying for other classes or working a job, you could do this in a shorter period of time and study more hours in the day. Or maybe you're working or you're a full-time student and you need to up that up to 6 months or something. There's so much MCAT content that you can go on the internet that's going to be way better than, you know, the advice, the specific advice that I can give you. But I do want to share kind of what worked for me and the specific tidbits that I took that I believe helped me have success. So I took the MCAT on April 26th. I got a 507. That's a 70th percentile score, which definitely isn't like, I remember when I was pre-med and I scored that 507 and I was defeated. I was like, oh my gosh, this is an awful score. And you get so self-conscious and you start to compare. Comparison is the thief of joy, guys. I remember going to my interviews and they would bring up my MCAT as a 507 and they would be like, congratulations on your awesome MCAT. And I'd be like, well, thank you. That's like, I've never heard anyone say that I did great on the MCAT when I've been hanging out on these really neurotic platforms for so long, saying that a 507 MCAT was not even going to be close enough for me to get into medical school. So just remember that when you take your MCAT exam or your GRE, just don't get caught up in the comparison. A lot of times you're going to get a score and it's going to be a score that maybe is going to be scrutinized by other students, but it's a good score. You know, at the end of the day, when you go and apply, you're getting above these 50th, 60th percentiles. I wouldn't worry too much about trying to compare yourself to other applicants. You're going to be all set. Yes, I got a 507 on the MCAT, and one of the biggest, probably the most important part of studying for the MCAT is doing practice exams. Now, that sounds disgusting. Practicing a 7.5-hour exam over and over and over does not sound like fun, and I will say it is not fun. However, doing those practice exams and building up test-taking endurance is super crucial to performing on the MCAT and feeling comfortable on MCAT day when you do go to take it. That's point number one. Point number two is it's also incredibly predictive of what your actual MCAT score is going to be. So I took 5 practice exams with the AAMC, which is the platform that puts out the MCAT, that makes the MCAT. It's sort of like the gold standard for studying for the MCAT because it's coming straight from the source. These people make the MCAT. So I took 5 exams from them, 5 practice exams. All 5 of them were scored, and my scores were 504, 506, 508, 505, and 510. Now, average all of those together, and you get a 506.6 average, which is a 67.4 percentile. Now, if you'll notice, that is incredibly close to what I actually scored on the MCAT. I got a 507, and it was 70th percentile. So when you're taking these practice exams, you can definitely use these practice exams kind of as a gauge on where you are at with your MCAT studying, on how close you are to the score that you want to get. Because, and this isn't just for AA, but in the pre-med community, these are very predictive scores oftentimes. Use it as kind of a litmus test on where you're at with your scores, if you need to study more, if you need to push your test date back, which is totally fine. It's okay to push your test date back. So just keep that in mind with these practice exams, that they will be incredibly predictive oftentimes of what you're actually going to get on the exam. Not 100% predictive, but oftentimes they're very accurate to what you actually get. So I took 5 practice exams from the AAMC, and I took 7 other exams from third-party sources. Now, these third parties are great because you get access to these full-length exams. However, they're oftentimes going to not be exactly representative of what is on the actual MCAT. Now, if you put those together, 5 through the AAMC, 7 through third-party exams, that's going to be 12 practice exams that I took leading up to my MCAT. And that was basically every week on the Monday, I would take a practice exam, all the way up until I took my actual exam. About 3 months before I took my actual exam, I was taking practice exams every single week. And like I mentioned earlier, these practice exams are going to build test-taking endurance. If you don't take any practice exams and go and take the MCAT on the day that you're supposed to take your MCAT, it's going to be a shock to your system. It's not a recipe for success. You need to have some kind of practice and some kind of previous exposure to the intensity that it is going to be sitting at a computer for 7.5 hours, clicking answers and highlighting stuff. It's going to be super critical that you get that practice in. It's not fun practice, but it has to be done so that it's not a shock to your system. I remember the first time I took a practice exam that was full length. I took one half-length one first. I took my first full-length exam, and I got done with that exam, and I just wanted to nap. I just wanted to sleep away. I was so fried. My eyes were like bleeding as it was what it felt like. Use blue light glasses, by the way. Blue light glasses are going to be your friend if you're taking the MCAT. And I got done with that first practice exam and I was just absolutely fried. Second time, I still felt pretty fried, but I felt a little bit better than I did the first time. And I think by the time I got around to the AAMC exam, so that's 7 exams in, did I finally feel like I knew what to expect when I walked in to take an exam. So my point is that it really is important to build up that test-taking endurance. It's not gonna be in your best idea to go into the MCAT without having taken any full-length exams and just thinking that you're gonna be totally fine taking this exam. You're not gonna be. You have to do that practice. And it is hard, it does suck, but it's gonna be so worth it by the time you get to your actual MCAT, to sit in your chair and kind of feel just a sense of comfort as you're taking this exam. Now, one other thing to notice about these practice exams is that when I would take these exams, I would try to simulate in every way how it was going to feel on test day. I ate the same Qdoba breakfast every morning. I would drive to the location where I would be doing my actual MCAT and then drive to the library where I would take my practice exam. Sort of like getting into a mental habit of what it's going to look like on test day. There's so much research that shows that if you practice things in the exact same environment or as close as you can get to what you're going to be doing in a stressful scenario, you're going to perform the best. So yeah, I would eat the same breakfast. I would drive to the test center. I would sit in the same room in the library doing these practice exams. I would have those little headphones that they give you on test day, and I would bring the same snacks for lunch. Everything was exactly the same every single day, and I kept that on test day as well. So when I took my test and I had my same breakfast and I had my same lunch and I had those same headphones on and I knew where the location I was going to was, that I think that that's a big reason on why I felt so comfortable on test day taking this exam. So definitely keep that in mind. Try to simulate as best as you can the testing conditions when you're studying and doing these practice exams for the MCAT. Okay, so you've got practice exams. I'd say that's the biggest part of your MCAT preparation. Next thing that I want to talk about is Anki. Now, Anki, even if you haven't really gotten into the weeds of MCAT studying or how people study in Anesthesiologist Assistant School, Anki is everyone's best friend. It utilizes 2 very important principles: spaced repetition and active recall. These 2 principles essentially put together is how Anki builds their formula for maximum retention when it comes to memorizing information for exams, for classes. Medical students and anesthesiologist assistant students swear by it, basically. It is the gold standard for intaking and memorizing information. information. Anki specifically is a program that you can download on your computer or on your iOS device or whatever you use, and it's a flashcard system. You can build flashcards, you can download pre-made flashcards of different information, and there's so many different things that you can do with it. It's basically just a flashcard app at the end of the day. However, you can do things such as block off certain information and it'll show it once you answer the question, once you flip over the flashcard. It has this system where you can answer how well did you know this content after seeing the flashcard. So let's say I get a flashcard and I get something on the Krebs cycle, which I've already forgotten the Krebs cycle. I'm gonna be honest. If you give me a Krebs cycle question, it's probably going in one ear and out the other. Let's say I get a Krebs cycle question and I have no idea what the answer is. I can click I have no idea. There's an option for that, and then it will show me that same flashcard much sooner than it would every other flashcard. And then let's say that shows me a question about like the neuromuscular junction. I did a ton of sport and exercise science classes. I know a lot about that. Let's say they give me a question about like one of those neurotransmitters and I nail it. I get the question right. I can say, hey, I knew this question really well, and it won't show me that flashcard again for a really, really long time until it thinks that I'm going to forget that information. What it ends up doing at the end of the day is you get maximum exposure to concepts that you don't know, and you get minimum exposure to concepts that you know really well. And as you guys probably, I did this when I was studying, but I would just study things that I knew really well and kind of build my confidence. And although that's, good for building confidence, it's not good for actually learning information that you don't already know. So by using Anki, by using active recall, by using spaced repetition, you get to efficiently learn information that you wouldn't have learned otherwise much quicker, and you get to stay on top of the information that you already know. It's a really cool program. It's a really cool application, and students go through so many flashcards a day that it can be kind of ridiculous. You think you're doing so many flashcards and it just feels mind-numbing clicking a button on a computer. So my little hack that I used with this was this guy right here. This is an 8-bit it's a little controller basically, and it's kind of like a Switch controller, like a Nintendo Switch controller. You can essentially hold it in your hand, and each one of these buttons, like I know this question really well, I kind of know this question, don't really know this question, and I have no clue. So you can hold this basically at your computer or your iPad, and you can just click away on this, and it sort of gamifies it, is what med students call it. So this made it super easy where when I'm on a plane or when I'm sitting in the library, when I'm studying, it sort of makes it a little bit more fun to pull out my computer and do this unbelievable amount of Anki flashcards. So this is my little tip that I would recommend you guys try for MCAT studying, or any kind of studying, even if it's not for the MCAT. Maybe it's for, a class that you have or an AA class. Anki is definitely the gold standard when it comes to flashcard programs. One other thing that I used for the MCAT was a program called UWorld. UWorld is essentially this massive data bank of practice questions that are formatted the same way that an MCAT question would be formatted. One of my regrets that I wish, and we'll kind of get into the things that I would change that I would probably do a little bit better when I was taking my MCAT. I wish I went through every single UWorld question. I sort of slacked on UWorld. I didn't do all of them. I probably got like 75% of the way in, which is still a ton of questions. I don't remember how many questions are in UWorld, but it was a lot. My regret is I wish I went through every one of those questions. UWorld, people complain about UWorld because it's really, really niche questions, really, really specific questions, but that's also how the MCAT is. I got a question on, I got the most weird questions on optics on the physics section of my MCAT exam. So you never know when these concepts are going to show up, and UWorld covers every single base. It covers every concept basically that you would probably need to know for the MCAT. It's as comprehensive as it gets. Use UWorld. It does cost money, so keep that in mind, but UWorld I think is going to be one of your best friends if you are studying for the MCAT, because it has just about everything that you could possibly need to know for the MCAT. Yeah, one of my biggest regrets was not going all the way through UWorld. Probably another one of my biggest regrets was not maintaining Anki all the way throughout my studying. I did Anki to kind of build a base, in addition to my textbooks that I was reading, to build that base, to build that foundation. And then once I got to these practice exams, that sort of consumed my entire studying at that time. I sort of slacked on the Anki flashcards. So what I would change for next time is, even if it's just a small amount of Anki flashcards a day. Anki knows when you're going to forget stuff. I don't know how it does it, but it knows. What I would do differently is I would keep using Anki all the way throughout my studying up until basically like maybe a week before I was going to take the exam. I did not do that. I stopped probably like 2 months before I took my actual exam. I would definitely stay on top of Anki more, because it's one of your best friends when it comes to maintaining information, when it comes to retaining information. I mean, Anki means memorization in Japanese, so you know it's going to be really good at helping you memorize and retain information. And probably the last big regret that I had was all the way through taking the MCAT, all the way up until I took my exam. I fell victim to what I talked about earlier about trying to compare my score to other students. I would just obsessively hang out on pre-med Reddit, on Student Doctor Network, because I was pre-med at that time. And all of that together, seeing everyone else's scores, hearing that my scores that I was getting were probably not good enough for medical school, hearing that over and over and over again, it really wears you down. And it got to a point where about a month out of taking my MCAT, I was at one of our athletic meetings, and I was just about to like have a breakdown. I had to like leave the room because I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm so obsessed with what am I going to get on the MCAT? And it's so easy to do that because this is one of the biggest barriers that you have to getting into medical school, to getting into Anesthesiologist Assistant School. It's easy to get caught up, and this is so important. It was also around that time that I discovered what Anesthesiologist Assistant was. And I think that discovering that and finding this passion, finding this route that I could take that allowed me to look at the MCAT and say, I'm going to take it. I don't know what I'm going to get on this MCAT, but I'm going to do my very best. And it doesn't matter what everyone else's scores is. It doesn't matter what everyone expects me to get on the MCAT. I'm just going to take it. I'm going to get my score. We're going to apply with it. And that's going to be that. And I think that having that mindset, that change in mindset from what it was before, I just got so much more efficient. My practice, like I said, my practice scores went from 506 to 508. And then my last one was a 510. So they just increased slowly, and I got better. And I was stuck in that low 500, even below 500 for a couple of those third-party exams. By being able to have that change in mindset, I feel like that was one of the biggest things that contributed to being able to figure out studying for the MCAT. Mindset is such a big part of studying for the MCAT. How you determine that and your actions as far as that goes are going to be really critical to your success on the MCAT. So I took my MCAT, I got my score, able to get entry into Anesthesiologist Assistant School, and what a lot of people are asking about now is what does the board exam look like? That's the next biggest thing you have on the docket as far as big exams after you get into AA school. So the board exam is administered by the National Commission for Certification of Anesthesiologist Assistants, or NCCAA. It's taken on a computer, consists of 180 multiple choice questions. 30 of those questions are pre-test questions and don't actually count to your score. I think the MCAT does that too, where there's some questions that they're just testing out to see how well students answer on them, if it's even feasible for them to put it on the exam. And the length of the exam, there's one optional 10 to 15 minute tutorial at the beginning, 45 question, 55-minute sections, and one optional 15-minute break in between sections. Now, in order to pass the board exam, it is a pass-fail exam. There is a national first-time pass rate that's well above 90%. You can go program by program. Most of them are going to be darn near 100%. They're all super-duper high. Basically, the whole idea is if you can get into Anesthesiologist Assistant School, if you can make it through AA school, you're going to be able to pass the board exam. That's typically what these programs seek with their students. Almost perfect board exam pass rates all over the board. A lot of students have said it is something to prepare for, but it's not something to worry about. Most of the time, you will be fine. You will be able to do it. The minimum passing score fluctuates, but it's usually closer to 50% than 100%. For example, in October 2023, the minimum passing score was 62%, and the national average score was 74%. So the board exam, for me, it feels like it's a long ways away. But I've talked to students, and they're like, it'll come up quick on you. And what is that? So it's probably like 3 years from now that I'll probably be looking to take that exam. The different things that I want to keep in mind when I am studying for this board exam, stuff that I want to take with me that I learned from the MCAT and apply it to the board exam. Probably the biggest thing is going to be practice questions. Same thing for the MCAT. Practice questions are going to be your best friend. I definitely want to keep doing that all the way throughout AA school, and by the time I get to the board exam, just nailing down those practice questions over and over and over, and just nailing that information into your head is going to be the key to success. Other thing is Anki. I know a lot of students use Anki in AA school. I definitely want to do that as well. I'm kind of a nerd for this, but I kind of like sitting at the computer clicking away on Anki. I just think it's maybe it's because I've gamified it, but that is definitely something that I do want to keep doing in preparation for the board exam. And the last thing is I'm just going to try to not stress it. Every time that I learn how to let go, every time I learn how to just have a positive growth mindset when it comes to these big exams, I see the best performance. I see my studying be the most efficient. That's definitely what I want to have in mind as I'm preparing for the board exam. So that's going to do it for this video, talking everything about studying, what I've learned in my undergraduate degree, what I've learned as I took the MCAT, and what I want to take into going into AA school as far as studying goes. So I hope this was helpful in some way. The biggest caveat that I do want to say is that everyone is going to study differently. Some people are going to just have no use for flashcards. Some people are going to really need practice questions. It just depends from person to person. So take this with a grain of salt. This is how I learned best. This is where I was able to see success. If something doesn't work for you, if it's not the most efficient way for you to study, then don't do it. Find new resources, be creative, find new ways to study. And I think that will be your greatest ally when you are going through these really stressful exams, the MCAT, the board exam, different exams in your undergraduate degree. That's gonna do it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope this helped in some way for you guys as you're getting ready for these big exams. If you have any questions, feel free to drop a comment, leave a like below, make sure to subscribe, and we will see you guys in the next video. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.